Hi there. Today we're going to build a REST client using JavaScript. So this is how we could create some JavaScript code running on a web page that would interact with our REST service. And so we've got a couple of slides to look at here. This is what we're going to do. So basically we have the browser executing some JavaScript which forms up the request. The web server running the ASP.NET Web API will give us back the response. So what do we need? We need to have Visual Studio with our REST server running. Obviously, if you're using a different technology, the same thing would apply, just whatever tools you want to use there. So here's the first thing that we have to be worried about. First of all, there's a security concern in doing this. Your HTML page that runs the JavaScript to connect to your web server must be on the same domain as your web server. So in other words, I can't just go create a random page and have it execute JavaScript and contact my site. That's a security feature in modern browsers that prevents cross-site scripting attacks and cross-site attacks. And so you can't create an HTML page that talks directly to a REST endpoint that isn't on the same domain. And we're going to be using our API key and user ID and password in JavaScript. So remember that anything that you put in JavaScript for a web page or in HTML, that the client browser can simply do view source on your page and can see exactly what that API key, user ID, and password is. So they would see all of that information. So never do this in production environments or anywhere where you need to keep these values secure. We're doing this just for an example. You'd have different ways of going and having the user log in first or use a session. There's lots of different ways around this, and we're not going to go into that in detail. So please be aware that the user ID and password that we're using here is just for example tutorial purposes. Please don't put that into production. And we are going to be using a thing called XMLHttpRequest. We'll get into that here shortly. Alright, so let's jump right into it. So because we need this to run in the same domain, what we're going to do, I'm going to run this locally, and what we're going to do is add a web page to our server. So let's just do this, add new item, and this is going to be simply an HTML page. I'm not doing an ASP.NET page or anything else like that. We're just doing a standard plain old HTML page, and we'll call this a JavaScript REST client. And what we're going to do is we're just going to put some script in here. So I'm just going to put a script tag, and inside of here is where we will write our JavaScript that will do what we need it to do. And so we're going to start out by getting a request object. So we just say we want a new XMLHttpRequest. You'll notice IntelliSense helps us out on that. And next, we are going to add an event handler. Now or an event listener. We do this so that we can do this asynchronously. So in other words, we want your page to continue to run, and it turns out that in this example, the only thing that's happening is running this script. But if you had other things going on the page, you might want to have that. So what we do here is simply say when there's a ready state change, we are going to call this method that we're going to write called process request, and the last parameter on this is false. Okay, now let's open our request. So for the first thing we do is do an open. So the add event listener, we haven't written the function yet. We'll do that here in just a minute. Well, actually, let's go ahead and just do that now. Let's just complete this code as we go. So we're going to have a function called process request. Remember in JavaScript that you're not really going to have a compiler that's going to tell you when there's a problem, so watch your typing. If things don't work right, go back and check. So we'll fill in this process request function here in just a minute. So whenever this request is being processed and there's a ready state change, that will call this function. So that lets us do this asynchronously. So first thing we're going to do is open our request, and the first thing we do is provide the provide the REST verb, in this case get, and then provide the URL. And because I'm running locally, it's going to be localhost, and your port number may be different, so adjust that accordingly. And we're going to go get all the persons that exist in the database. So we're going to actually get an array of objects back. The last parameter says true, which means process this asynchronously. I'm not going to show a synchronous example because it's not a good idea to block the thread doing that. And then what we need to do is set our request headers. So we have two request headers we have put in here for security. One is looking for API key. And I have a particular value I have mine set at. So let's get out of this slideshow and get back over here to Visual Studio. And this is in the message handlers right here. So it's looking for this value, so I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in. As the value here. So that's that header. The other header is our user ID and password. And again, remember, we never want to do this in a situation where this information can be used to hack. So authorization, and we are going to do basic, and there is basic, and B2A will do the base64 encoding for us. It's a built-in JavaScript thing. And our user ID is Jack. And you could put all this in one string. I'm just being explicit so that you can actually see where the user ID and password are in Jones. Okay, so there's our two headers that we need set up. And then it's really easy. We just call request.send. And that's all there is to it. That will send that request off. Now the question becomes what happens when the request happens and when it's done. So remember this ready state change. Basically what's going to happen is that the HTML or HTTP request goes through several stages. When it connects to the server, when it sends the request, when it gets the request back. And we're looking for a particular status code that it returns back, which is the number 4, which means it's done. So if we say request.ready state, if we say is the request ready state of 4, and we got back a 200. So request dot status is equal to a 200. If those two things are true, then we are going to go get the response, and we're going to parse out the JSON. This is JSON coming back, so we're going to use the JSON class to parse this out, and it's whatever comes back in the response text. Now you'll notice this is a little bit weird because we're calling XMLHttpRequest. There isn't a JSON HTTP request, although I know some people have written a library out there to do this with the same thing without having to kind of do this additional parsing step. But for our purposes, we're just going to go ahead and do this. So basically we say, well, if the response has something in it, then what we're going to do is write out to the document and I'm just going to put some hacky HTML in here. So I'm just going to output total objects return. So it turns out that this is essentially going to be an array, and response. So this tells me how many there were, and then we close with a, just close that tag like that. I'm going to get a little bit more real estate here so you can see. Okay, and then what we're going to do is iterate through those items. So and I'm going to write this little method called printObject. And you'll see what that does here in just a minute. So we'll just pass in the element of the array. Okay, so we've got to write that still. So that's if we were good. So what happens if we weren't good? So if the request.readyState is still a 4, but we didn't get a 200 back, then we want to just echo that to the screen. So document.write, and we'll just put in that there was some error type, and we'll output the status code, whatever that is. So if we got a 403 back, or a 401, or 500, or whatever, we get that back here. Just a little formatting. So this request has the code and the text that goes with it. Alright, so that's all good. The only thing that we still need to do is we actually need to do this printObject method. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So and we're going to pass into this JSON object. And forgive my hacky HTML. You can certainly pretty this up with cascading style sheets and other things like that. For me, just in the sake of time, we'll take. So what we're going to do is essentially print out all the different fields in the object, and we're going to make sure that those are encased in a horizontal rule, which is the HR tag. Alright, so now we're ready to actually put out the values. So it'll look something like this for each one of these. Again, we'll separate these with a paragraph. So ID equals, and then we'll put plus JSON object. And this is really easy. It's just .id is all we have to do. Because that JSON object already knows about the different fields, which if you'll remember are ID, first name, last name, pay rate, start date, and end date. So I'm going to copy this, and we'll just put those in real quick. So we had ID, and we have last name, we have first name, we have pay rate. I'm not doing any formatting on this, I just want to get this to print out for us. And then we'll copy this one. One more to go here. So I did all this just so you could actually see the output on the web page, right? So we've got that going for us. And down here in the body, we'll maybe put a header, JavaScript, REST, client. So we have that in our title, and then we're also going to output on the page. Okay. Okay, so we have this web page now. So the question is, how do we actually get this to run? And it turns out, because I don't have any HTML in here, that the web server will try to run this automatically for us. So assuming I haven't got a typo somewhere in all that JavaScript, which is a challenge, as I said, one of my common errors whenever I'm doing JavaScript, just because it's not, you don't have a compiler checking things, is just little syntax errors, space, whatever. So there is our page that came up. And we'll just give it a second here. So over here on Postman, we'll actually send this request in and make sure that everything's working properly. So you'll notice, even though there's our response back. This hasn't come back yet, which leads me to believe that I have some error in here. So I'm going to go look for typos. So that's what we do. So we're just going to go back through and check this real quick. All right, so we have our request. Again, new XMLHttpRequest. We have our add event listener process request. Let's just check the name of that. That looks okay. And we're going to add so we have the event listener. We're going to open it with get and then localhost :198.85. So I have a typo there in the port. So let's try this again now. So in that case, it didn't throw an error because it could never even contact the server to begin with. So this process request never even got called. So let's see what our issue is. So let's just make sure we have not got another typo in here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in here. All right, that looks good. So the two headers look okay. Oops, I got a typo there. And I should notice that from the little green underscore going on there. I didn't have that, and that's the beauty of JavaScript right there. And down here, if you might notice, there's another typo, so look for your little green tildes to fix things. Those will help you. So what do we think? Should we try it third time's a charm, and hopefully it will all work right now that we have some of the syntax errors cleaned up? The page was probably showing us a JavaScript error somewhere, but let's go ahead and try it again. So view page source, this is what I was talking about before. Anybody can get in here and just look at your code, including your user ID and password that you're passing through. So you usually don't want to do that. So okay, so there it finally came back, and there's our total objects returned were true, 2, and we have the two IDs there and the data. So you'll notice now that it's connected. It seems to work fine. If I do a refresh, it comes back immediately. So it just takes a second for it to kind of get going there the first time. So we'll run it one more time just so you can see it work. This video was done based on a request that somebody had for doing a JavaScript client. So I recommend, if you have anything that you're interested in seeing, that you please let me know what that is, and I'll do my best. I can't do videos for everything, but whenever I get a response to go and work on one of these, it helps because then I know. So there you go. There's the data coming back from JavaScript. So again, one more time, security warning: do not put this stuff in the clear the way it is here in a production website. So thanks for watching. Thanks for watching all the videos. Please hit like on the videos if you like them. Feel free to put a comment in there if you have any questions or requests. I look forward to hearing from you. So hopefully this was useful for you to kind of walk you through how to use XML HTTP request to call a REST endpoint, get the data back in JSON, and process the actual JSON coming back. Now, so hopefully this has been useful for you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.